Welcome to North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for tuning in. It is crossover week in the legislature, and we'll explain what that is with our guest, who is Grand Forks State Representative Corey Mauch. He's a Democrat and also the assistant floor leader in the North Dakota House. Representative Mauch, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you were just elected the floor leader, the assistant floor leader. What is your job as assistant floor leader?
Well, in North Dakota, we have four leadership positions that work on the floor. We have the majority, the minority, the Republican and Democratic leaders, and their assistants. And as the assistant to Representative Kent Nonstead, I work with him. We keep track of all the bills that are in both the House and the Senate. We spend a lot of time visiting with our caucus members as well as the members of the majority party, really to see where things are at. We look at the budget, we look at policy bills. So my job, in some cases, is a vote counter. I think in Congress they would call this position the whip. We have a lot of opportunities to visit with all members in the legislature, and it's part of my job to make sure that the message is getting heard from our constituents to our members, and then really expressed in the final vote on the floor.
So, as in the minority, your job is to get that voice heard if you can.
Absolutely, and in North Dakota we have two political parties that are represented in Bismarck. The North Dakota Republican Party is the majority party in both the House and the Senate. Democratic NPL Party is the minority. We each represent about 14,000 North Dakota residents across the state, each of our districts. And really, while we represent or we serve under the label of the Democratic or the Republican Party, we're there to serve the 14,000 friends and neighbors that are back home, in my case in North Grand Forks. So we want to make sure that our legislators in our caucus are expressing the views of their constituents, and that we give them the vehicle to make their viewpoints heard.
Now, there's not a lot of really partisan divides in terms of the number of bills that you go through, which is well over 1,000. There are no more than really a handful that are partisan, correct?
That's very true. Most of the bills will come down to an urban versus rural, sometimes an east versus west, and then on the rare occasion you have a Republican versus Democrat ideological standoff, and you'll get some of those with tax bills or investments into certain areas such as early childhood education. They're not all strictly partisan, but sometimes to the casual observer they may appear partisan. And really it could be boiled down to one or two positions or one or 2 points in a bill. But for the most part, by and large, the legislature passes good policy with bipartisan support.
As we approach the crossover date, which is at the end of the week, where do you think the legislature is at right now?
Well, we've seen every bill has been heard. Every bill has gotten a vote. I believe we've passed a few hundred bills between both the House and the Senate. And now as we move into the second half, we're going to see a plethora of tax cuts, plenty of spending bills and proposals, and some that have yet to have heard their last words mumbled on one of the floors. So we have a great opportunity to make one-time investments using the budget surplus and the recent revenue as a result of economic development. We have an opportunity to make those investments into our communities and to the people of our state to really provide true and real property tax relief and reform, as well as other tax relief that North Dakotans need, and really address some of the other concerns that we're hearing, such as quality of life issues. So we're going to see a lot of those discussions that we've had over the last 30-some days, nearly 40 days, and you're going to see those brought up again before committees, the House, the Senate, and hopefully hearing many of those proposals or watching some of those proposals get brought to the governor's desk for final approval.
The analogy I like so far is that it's a hockey game. We finished the first period. Now you've got the second period, which is when the House bills are in the Senate bills are in the House, and then the third period is going to be the conference committees. And I'm thinking, just by what's transpired so far, that we're going to have some very intense conference committees.
I think you're right, and I'm glad that you used the hockey analogy as the Ralph Engelstad Arena and the University of North Dakota hockey team is in my district. So it's a very appropriate analogy. I think the question is who's driving the Zamboni between periods. You're right. The conference committees in the third period, if you will, that's where all of the discussions really turn to the final product. It's going to be taking good ideas that may have passed in some bills and some that failed to pass in others, and this is their chance to come together to meld a couple bills or a couple versions of bills together and produce the policy that North Dakotans are going to have before them for the next 2 years.
Now, the House did not get higher education because you represent Grand Forks, one of the big, strong supporters of higher education with a big institution. The bill came to the Senate and was passed with a few minor cuts in the governor's budget, but there was an attempt to put an amendment on that would have the Board of Higher Education potentially buy out the contract of Chancellor Ham Shirvani. And of course, the Student Association weighed in over the weekend saying they gave him a vote of no confidence. I'm just curious, from your district and from students in your district, what are you hearing?
Well, we have to be very careful to keep our attention on the students that attend the universities, the faculty that employ and do the research at our universities, and the families that make up the university system by either as alumni or sending their children to our campuses. It's unfortunate that this has served as a distraction. And we, personality debates aside, we have a tremendous university system that needs the legislature's attention. We need to re-examine how much we're going to be putting into the North Dakota School of Medicine, located on the University of North Dakota campus. And I hope that that's a conversation that will come forward. Of the constituents that I serve, many of them are students or faculty members, and they're worried that we are losing focus on them and the missions that they serve in educating North Dakota's youth and future leaders. With regard to the Chancellor, I believe the Senate had a long debate, a lengthy debate. Again, there are personality disagreements, and there's questions of his leadership and whether you're on one side or the other. We need to keep our attention where it deserves, and we'll likely hear that case again about the Chancellor when the Senate bill or when the higher education bill comes to the Senate or it comes to the House.
But you do mention about losing focus on students, education, teachers, etc. Are you worried that the higher education system could suffer some losses because of this? Because of the whole discussion about some of these, what some legislators in the Senate have called sideshow issues?
I am concerned that if we don't keep our focus on the university systems, the individual campuses and the students that attend, that we may walk away slightly disappointed in what we really could have done to build up and to enhance our system of higher education. The North Dakota Student Association, as you mentioned, represents the 48,000 students that attend all of our 11 public institutions, our campuses. And they have concerns. There's some that believe that the Chancellor is not the right fit for our university system. There's some that want to see him stay in his position a little longer and see where the roots in his placement really take. My biggest concern is us shutting out any of their voices. We did have that happen. We had one representative who was disappointed in the students taking a position on this issue. I disagree with his position. I think that students, faculty, parents, legislators, citizens of the state all should be weighing in on this and making sure that we as legislators know where they stand. But at the end of the day, we have a university system budget. We need to make sure that we're passing the policies that are going to be the most beneficial to North Dakota in the long run.
Since we're talking about education, K through 12 is in the House. As we tape this, it's not up for a vote yet, but apparently there have been some long and hard disagreements in committee over what that bill is going to look like.
It absolutely has, and we're still waiting to hear from our Appropriation Committee members as to what the final bill will look like. Over the last 4 years, the legislature has provided additional funding to school districts to buy down mill levies, up to 75 mills. Now, as we're looking at a formula, it's to set the value of education, have the schools pay up to so much, have a few taxes that are paid in lieu of, and the state makes up the difference, to really keep the property taxes as low as they can and increase the state share in funding public education. That has changed, and we'll see a final product, but it is the one vehicle that the legislature has at providing property tax reform.
And the Democrats very early on said, we need to focus on property taxes, less on income tax cuts and corporate tax cuts.
That's absolutely right. In fact, going door to door, and we try to do this very often, I represent the smallest geographical district you can find in North Dakota. In fact, I even joke that the Mall of America and IKEA footprint in Minnesota probably are slightly larger than our district. Very high number of people living in a small space, a lot of apartments, single-family homeowners. Going door to door is very easy for me, and I get to hear from a lot of my constituents in a very short period of time. Never once did I hear someone say that we need to lower North Dakota income taxes. From no business have I heard that we need to lower corporate income taxes. In fact, if you want to make North Dakota a more business-friendly environment, you need to invest in the people who are going to be working in those jobs. You need to invest in the infrastructure that your employees use to get to work and that your trucks may use to turn a profit. And that's our proposal for enhancing North Dakota's business climate. The property taxes, that is hands down the #1 issue I hear of from constituents, from city leaders, that we need to really invest in our local communities and give them and empower them, give them the resources they need to lower property taxes.
But you did mention infrastructure too, and that's a good point because there was the fast track bill for highways to get some of the money in the hands of contractors now to get started on some of the road projects, not only in western North Dakota, but all over North Dakota.
Absolutely. In Grand Forks, we have many projects that need to be fast-tracked, if you will. Just for example, with the Columbia Overpass in downtown or on the central part of Grand Forks, that's one of those stretches of roads that has needed some assistance. There's a lot of farm-to-market roads in counties across the state. And then, of course, you have the needs of western North Dakota. What we'd like to see, the communities, the 16 or so counties that are bearing the brunt of this oil development, we'd like to see more of the money from property and from extraction and production taxes go back to those communities or stay in those communities so they can reinvest in the roads, the bridges that oil companies, the trucks are using, that their citizens are using. We think that is a high priority for this session, and we certainly want to make sure that that gets done.
On full disclosure, when I went to UND, the Columbia Road overpass was still being talked about as being built, so we've come a long ways in Grand Forks.
We certainly have, and I'll tell you, it cuts down on the commute a little bit, and when I'm maybe someday sitting in a similar chair many years down the road, I'll be telling the person next to me how we were once talking about a 42nd Street overpass over the railroad tracks. So you're right, it certainly has evolved.
Well, as you see the state grow, not only Grand Forks, but everywhere the state population is growing, there are more demands on the infrastructure. There are more demands for things like childcare, and there are a lot of issues that are still on the plate for legislators to deal with.
Absolutely, and in fact, that's what we hear about more often than not is early education and child care services available in communities where parents are working 2 or 3 jobs. The cost of housing in many communities in western North Dakota is skyrocketing. It better resembles Manhattan real estate prices than it does traditionally North Dakota rental prices. So we have a lot of those, I don't want to say smaller needs, but they haven't been as high on the radar for many people because they impact a relative fewer amount. In full disclosure, since we're on that, I'm originally from Minot, North Dakota. Well, during the 2011 flood, I had some family members who were affected and many who were not, but we had friends and co-workers from my family that were living there. You hear the needs of people from Minot, Stanley, Newtown, Towner, Williston. Those voices need to be heard, and we have an obligation to serve all North Dakotans as best as we can.
Do you think the voices are being heard?
There's some days where I wonder if we're listening, if we're on the same channel. I think that their message is always resonating, and there are legislators who are advocating for those voices. But I don't think that enough of my colleagues drive down Highway 23 in western North Dakota or experience the downtown area of Minot in the fall of 2011 or heard the stories of those who were either in shelters or putting up friends and neighbors. There are unique challenges, and I choose to never judge or cast judgment or to be fast to react without knowing what that individual has endured in their life, to walk a mile in their shoes, if you will. So we really hope that more of our citizens will reach out to their legislators and encourage their voices to be heard in both committee and on the floor.
Has there been anything that surprised you in terms of the bills that have gone through, maybe in terms of spending or investment in infrastructure? Is there something that has surprised you so far?
There's always really good ideas that if you'll hear are perhaps a little before their time. In fact, you can almost play floor speech bingo on some of the bills. knowing that some things will be said and you can more or less anticipate it. Some of the bigger surprises was us taking money out of early childhood education. North Dakota is one of a handful of states that does not invest in Head Start. We provide no assistance for early childhood education. Even our new superintendent of public instruction, Kirsten Baszler, a member who ran as a Republican, was advocating to members of both parties that we need to invest in early childhood education and give the 4- and 5-year-old of the state the greatest chances they can at succeeding. The facts don't lie. Early childhood education is a tremendous way of creating the best education system you can find in the country. And we hope that that conversation is not over and that we can start making those investments here before the end of April.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but you had the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce come in and say they never thought they'd be talking about child care as an issue, but child care is a major issue for them. And I assume early childhood education is going to be an issue for them too.
I could not agree with the Chamber more on that point, that when you look at businesses across the state, it's the ability to have good quality child care for a family that works 1 or 2, maybe 3 jobs between the parents, where they have to have someone watching over their child at an intermediate age. Ideally, you can have a parent stay at home with those children. We'd all like to have that, but sometimes circumstances occur, and you don't want child care to be the barrier for that parent to provide the best living environment for their children.
And to be fair, there are a number of Republicans who feel that way too.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's just it. This is one of those issues that it is not partisan in any way, shape, or form. In fact, a lady from Williston had written an editorial about how they were really disappointed that this had happened, and it is not a partisan issue and never should be. In fact, it is by and large about the children of our state and really investing in their education.
I'd like to now switch gears a little bit, go into some election law bills. A number of them were on the floor of the House this week. A number of them failed, and they were initiatives by Democrats for greater transparency, if you want to call it that, for some of the campaign donations. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a very fair assessment, and that's what many of my colleagues and I had worked on for many years, is enhancing transparency, disclosure, and oversight over the elected body. For example, some of the bills included campaign finance reform and requiring greater disclosure of how much money is raised. There's 2 sets of standards in our legislature, or for our elected officials. Statewide candidates have 1 set of reporting requirements, legislative candidates have another. And we don't think that it's fair that 2 sets of standards for a similar style campaign exist. We wanted to see that's changed. We also, in North Dakota, legislative candidates or candidates for statewide office, they don't report expenditures. In fact, when people ask, what happens to campaign money when you're not running for office, and if, let's say, you lose, there really is no answer. And there's no restrictions on how you spend that money. I believe in some states, in fact, I believe recently in Illinois, a congressman, Jesse Jackson Jr., was convicted on using campaign expenses for campaign dollars for personal expenses. So our bills would have really addressed that. We had a few others that I'm sure are also worth discussing.
You also had a number of election bills, some of them brought up by Republicans, tightening the voter rules and trying to tighten rules about when you can vote absentee, when you can go to an early voting polling place. A lot of those bills have died, but there was a change, and I don't know if I've got my hands around it entirely, about voter ID that has come out.
That's one that is still evolving, and that was, and I hate to use the expression, but really came into being in the dark of night. It was the 11th hour when an amendment was put onto a bill that changed one bill from being a 70-day requirement to vote into a voter ID bill. It had tremendous repercussions for voting, for the Department of Transportation, the Secretary of State, counties, the university system, and many of our senior citizens. The bill would require you to have a form of ID no matter what. And if you are an individual who no longer drives, or you haven't cast a ballot in many years and perhaps at the last minute decided you wanted to, this would place an additional burden on you in order to cast a ballot. Some claim that there is a need for elections reform. The problem is we're changing a system that, one, has had no documented problems, but two, we're doing it on a hodgepodge basis. We're not taking a comprehensive look at why our system is the way it is and how we can enhance the voter's experience. If we can study that, look closely into the issue, we might be able to come to term with a way of modernizing and improving the way that citizens cast a ballot in our state.
Yet trying to keep North Dakota as the only state in the union that doesn't have voter registration.
That's correct, and actually, most people don't know this, we were the first state in the union to have voter registration. And we passed it at the turn of the 20th century. We were the first state to create such a system, but later, several decades later, we abolished voter registration. So it's really, it's come full circle for North Dakotans. And many individuals are proud of that we are such a small, close-knit society within North Dakota that registration is not needed. And to be truthful, voter registration benefits political parties more than it does the political process, the voting process. I don't think that voter registration is the solution, and it's certainly a conversation that's never really come up as of late.
Well, the bill that passed about voter ID, they did take out the photo ID requirement. I thought that was kind of interesting.
That was interesting, and that creates a unique challenge. And now the Secretary of State will be required to produce a voter card. So it's almost voter registration light, because you have to have an ID. And if you don't have a driver's license or a non-driver's license ID is issued by the Department of Transportation, then you have to go to the Secretary of State's office and get a voter card that does not have your photo on it. Again, it goes to say that, or it goes to show we need to have a greater conversation about the need for reform to really address the system that we have and take a 30,000-foot view of the way we cast ballots in the state and see if there really is a need for change, or if this is just people that are you're proposing really good ideas that were concocted overnight.
In the couple of minutes we have left, I want you to answer this question. What's the best thing to come out of the session so far?
Right now, I'm going to say Cayley's Law in the Senate. I think that was a tremendous accomplishment. Senator Tyler Axness from Fargo put forward a tremendous idea, something that I think we should have been discussing years ago, but mandatory reporting of an abducted or missing child, and that just recently passed the Senate by near unanimous vote. I'm pretty proud of that.
And there was, in the beginning, some pushback on it.
There was, and I think there will be, by those who are just concerned that a child is missing and that it should not be the responsibility of a parent or a guardian to report that missing child. But we've heard, in the Senate heard, compelling stories about how this is the most critical time to report an individual's absences in the first 24 to 48 hours. And this bill would just require that if you know that there is a missing child, you have an obligation to report that to law enforcement officials. I think that's it's had tremendous success in other states. Very proud of that bill.
Now I'll flip it. What's been the biggest disappointment?
Perhaps on a similar note, short of the removal of funding on early childhood education, we need to take a look at some of the challenges of our most vulnerable. Many of our young children who perhaps are falling through the cracks with health insurance, with school funding, and as we heard quite a bit was about the access to nutrition. And we have the free and reduced lunch program that's federally provided. And we learned through an unusual set of circumstances that there are many children who are going without milk during a midday break. The youngest children, K through 8 or K through 3. I think we need to do more to address that challenge. I certainly hope that that's something that can come through in the second and third period of this game, this political hockey game, if you will, and really turn the focus on how we can help improve the lives of the most vulnerable citizens in North Dakota.
Now, again, you do mention about second and third period. An idea may die in the first period of the session, but there are always ways to revive it somehow if you can put it on a bill where there's germaneness.
Absolutely. In fact, it was the long-time Minot representative, Representative Brynhild Hauglin, with a name named after her, said that you can get a lot accomplished if you don't mind who gets the credit. A lot of good ideas that may have been introduced in the first period of the session, the first half of the session, can come back onto other bills. And you'll see that from time to time. I think one that we just recently saw was a tax credit for disabled veterans that was recently taken out of one individual's bill and worked into someone else's. You see that happen from time to time. It's a way to save a good idea, and in some cases it's a way to ensure that it gets passed.
So can we say fasten your seatbelts? It could be a bumpy flight.
Well, a bumpy flight. I was also a race car driver for many years, so fastening your seatbelts in the world of politics, I'd say make sure that it's a 5-point belt, and you'll feel really safe and in your seat. It's only going to get more exciting as we move forward.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for the time.
Absolutely, a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Our guest today on Legislative Review, Representative Corey Mock from Grand Forks. He's a Democrat and also the Assistant House Minority Leader. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson.